It's 6:30 in the morning in Austin, Texas. The sun is barely up. Most restaurants haven't even unlocked their doors. But here, something strange is already happening. A line of people stretches down the sidewalk. Some are sitting in camping chairs. Some are drinking coffee. Some are playing cards. Others have simply accepted that this is how they'll spend the next several hours. And here's the surprising part. The restaurant they're waiting for won't open until 11 a.m. That's nearly 5 hours away. If you didn't know any better, you might think tickets for a major concert had just gone on sale, or maybe someone famous was about to appear. But no, these people are waiting for barbecue. Not just any barbecue. They're waiting for Franklin barbecue. Every single day, people fly into Austin from all over the United States, and sometimes from other countries, just for one meal. Some arrive before sunrise. Some wait 3 hours. Others wait 6, and almost nobody seems angry about it. In fact, many people say the wait is part of the experience. Now, think about that for a second. We live in a world where groceries arrive in minutes. You can order dinner with a few taps on your phone. Coffee can be ready in less than a minute. Everything is built around speed. So why would thousands of people willingly spend half a day standing in line for smoked meat? Is it really that good? Or has Franklin barbecue become one of the biggest food myths in America? To answer that, we have to start with something most people notice before they ever take their first bite: the line. If you've ever searched for Franklin barbecue online, you've probably seen two things: the brisket and the line. The line has become almost as famous as the food itself. For first-time visitors, it's hard to believe. Surely people aren't actually waiting 4 or 5 hours for lunch. But they are, and they've been doing it for years. Some visitors arrive at 7 a.m. Others show up even earlier on weekends or holidays. The doors don't open until late morning, but by then, dozens of people are already waiting. So why doesn't everyone just come later? Because Franklin barbecue works differently from most restaurants. There's no endless supply of food waiting in the kitchen. Every brisket, every rack of ribs, every sausage link was started long before customers ever arrived. The smokers have been running through the night. By the time the restaurant opens, today's barbecue is already hours into its journey. And once today's meat is gone, that's it. No second batch, no emergency refill, no please come back in 30 minutes. If you arrive too late, you might find a sign that simply says, "Sold out." Imagine driving across Texas or flying from New York, only to discover there's no barbecue left. It happens more often than you might think. At first, this sounds like terrible business. Why not just cook more? Why risk disappointing customers every single day? It's a question almost everyone asks, and the answer isn't as simple as putting more meat on the smoker, because barbecue doesn't work like that. Before we get there, it's worth noticing something even more interesting. Something happens while people are waiting. The line stops feeling like a line. Strangers introduce themselves. People compare travel stories. Someone shares breakfast tacos. Someone else passes around cold drinks. Visitors exchange recommendations for other barbecue spots around Texas. By the time the doors finally open, many people have already made friends. It's almost like waiting outside Franklin has become its own tradition. In most places, waiting is considered a problem. Here, it's part of the attraction. But that still doesn't explain why people keep coming back. Before we get there, it's worth noticing something even more interesting. Something happens while people are waiting. The line stops feeling like a line. Strangers introduce themselves. People compare travel stories. Someone shares breakfast tacos. Someone else passes around cold drinks. Visitors exchange recommendations for other barbecue spots around Texas. By the time the doors finally open, many people have already made friends. It's almost like waiting outside Franklin has become its own tradition. In most places, waiting is considered a problem. Here, it's part of the attraction. But that still doesn't explain why people keep coming back.
When Franklin Barbecue finally opens for lunch, something unusual happens. Nobody rushes to claim a table. Instead, everyone quietly moves forward, one group at a time. The employees slice brisket by hand. Ribs are cut fresh. Turkey comes straight from the smoker. Nothing has been sitting under heat lamps all morning. The food arrives exactly as it's meant to be served. And then, little by little, it starts disappearing. Hour after hour, the menu gets smaller. First, the turkey might be gone. Then the pork ribs. Then the sausage. Eventually, only brisket remains. And finally, that disappears too. Some afternoons, Franklin Barbecue is completely sold out before 2 p.m., sometimes even earlier. Imagine owning one of the most famous restaurants in America and telling paying customers, "Sorry, we're out." Most restaurants would see that as failure. Franklin sees it differently. Because every brisket on the cutting board today began cooking yesterday. Some have spent up to 16 hours inside the smoker. You can't simply decide to make more at lunchtime. By the time you realize demand is higher than expected, it's already too late. The next batch won't be ready until tomorrow. That means every morning begins with a difficult decision. How much should we cook today? Too little, and customers leave disappointed. Too much, and hours of careful work could end up wasted. Finding that balance is harder than it sounds, especially when visitors are arriving from around the world. But here's what makes the story even more interesting. Franklin Barbecue isn't struggling. Quite the opposite. The restaurant has become one of the most successful barbecue destinations in America. Which raises an even bigger question. If demand is this high, if customers are willing to wait for hours, if people are literally flying across the country to eat here, why not simply make more barbecue? Why not open another location? Or 10 more? After all, that's exactly what most successful restaurants do. So why didn't Aaron Franklin? The answer reveals something that goes far beyond barbecue. It explains why Franklin became a legend while so many other restaurants became chains. And that's where the story gets really interesting.
If you've ever seen a line outside Franklin Barbecue, you've probably had the same thought as almost everyone else. Why don't they just open another restaurant? It seems obvious. The demand is already there. People are willing to wait for hours. The restaurant sells out almost every day. From a business perspective, this looks like an opportunity that's almost too good to ignore. We've seen this happen over and over again. A small local favorite becomes a regional chain, then a national brand. Eventually, the food is available almost everywhere. Convenient, predictable, scalable. So why didn't Franklin follow that path? The surprising answer is because Aaron Franklin never believed barbecue should be treated like fast food. Before Franklin became one of the most famous pitmasters in America, he started much smaller. In 2009, he and his wife Stacy opened a simple barbecue trailer in Austin. No giant kitchen, no expensive dining room, no massive staff. Just a smoker, a few picnic tables, and barbecue made the way Aaron believed it should be made. People noticed almost immediately. Word spread, the lines got longer, awards followed. Then came magazine features, television appearances. Eventually, a James Beard Award, something almost unheard of for a barbecue pitmaster. Success arrived faster than anyone expected. But something else happened too. The bigger Franklin became, the more pressure there was to grow. Investors showed interest, customers wanted more locations. People asked why there wasn't a Franklin Barbecue in Dallas, or Houston, or Los Angeles, or New York. Financially, expanding made perfect sense. But Aaron Franklin kept asking a different question. If we make more, can we still make it just as good? And for him, the answer wasn't always yes.
If you're enjoying stories like this, where food becomes a window into history, culture, and the people behind it, make sure to subscribe. Every week, we explore the hidden stories behind America's most iconic foods. From legendary barbecue to everyday favorites you've probably eaten your whole life without knowing how they became famous. Now, let's find out why Franklin chose quality over unlimited growth. To understand Franklin's decision, you first have to understand brisket. At first glance, brisket doesn't look special. It's just a large cut of beef from the lower chest of the cow. But it's also one of the toughest muscles on the entire animal. Think about what that muscle does. Every time a cow stands, walks, or simply shifts its weight, the brisket is working. Unlike tender cuts such as ribeye or tenderloin, brisket contains enormous amounts of connective tissue and collagen. If you cooked it like a steak, it would be almost impossible to chew. For generations, many people avoided brisket altogether because it was considered too tough. The magic only happens when time enters the equation. A lot of time. A typical Franklin brisket spends somewhere around 12 to 16 hours inside a wood-fired smoker. Not 12 minutes, not 2 hours, half a day or even longer. And throughout that entire process, something remarkable is happening. The collagen slowly melts into gelatin. The fat gradually renders. Smoke gently builds layer after layer of flavor. The outside develops a dark, peppery bark. Meanwhile, the inside becomes so tender that it can almost pull apart under its own weight. But here's the catch. None of this can be rushed. Turn up the heat, the outside burns before the inside is ready. Wrap it too early, you lose the bark. Take it off too soon, the meat stays tough. Leave it on too long, it begins drying out. There isn't a shortcut. There isn't a machine that magically finishes the job, and there isn't a button you can press to make barbecue happen faster. Great brisket has one ingredient that's impossible to manufacture: time. Which means every brisket Franklin serves today actually began yesterday. And that's exactly why making a little more isn't nearly as easy as it sounds. But time is only part of the story. The real challenge begins long before the brisket ever reaches the cutting board. It starts with the fire.
Most people imagine barbecue as something you simply cook, then serve. But for a pitmaster, cooking is really about managing a fire. Every log matters. Every change in temperature matters. Even the weather matters. A cold morning, a humid afternoon, a sudden gust of wind. Any of these can change how a smoker behaves. Unlike a modern oven that stays at one exact temperature, a traditional offset smoker is constantly changing. The fire has to be fed. The airflow has to be adjusted. The smoke has to stay clean. Too much smoke, and the meat becomes bitter. Too little, and it never develops that deep barbecue flavor people travel across the country to taste. This isn't a process you can simply automate. In fact, Aaron Franklin has often described barbecue as a craft that demands constant attention. The pitmaster isn't just cooking meat. He's reading the fire, watching the color of the smoke, feeling how the brisket bends, checking how the bark develops, listening to what the smoker is doing. Many of these decisions aren't based on timers. They're based on experience. That's one reason why producing twice as much barbecue isn't as simple as buying twice as many smokers. More smokers require more skilled pitmasters. More pitmasters require years of training, and consistency becomes much harder to maintain. One poorly cooked brisket might disappoint a customer. Hundreds of poorly cooked briskets could damage a reputation built over decades. For Aaron Franklin, that's a risk he has never been willing to take. Because people aren't waiting in line for good enough. They're waiting for the brisket they've heard about for years. The brisket that food writers call one of the best in America. The brisket that helped redefine Texas barbecue for an entirely new generation. And protecting that reputation has always mattered more than serving as many customers as possible. Ironically, that's exactly what keeps the line growing longer. The harder Franklin works to preserve quality, the more people want to experience it for themselves. But this raises another fascinating question. If brisket is now considered one of the greatest barbecue meats in America, why was it once one of the cheapest cuts a butcher could sell? The answer takes us back more than a century, long before Franklin barbecue ever existed.
Today, brisket is one of the most celebrated cuts of beef in America. People happily pay premium prices for it. Some restaurants charge more than $40 a pound. A whole brisket from a famous pitmaster can cost well over $100. But that wasn't always true. In fact, for much of American history, brisket was considered one of the least desirable cuts on the animal. That might sound surprising. After all, if it's so incredible today, why didn't everyone love it from the beginning? The answer lies in the meat itself. Long before modern smokers and temperature probes, most home cooks didn't have the time or the equipment to cook brisket properly. Roasting it often left it dry. Grilling it made it chewy. Frying it was almost impossible. So butchers usually sold brisket for much less than steaks or roasts. If you wanted tender meat, you bought ribeye. If you were shopping on a budget, you bought brisket. For many families, brisket wasn't a luxury. It was simply an affordable cut that required patience. And that's where Texas changed everything. During the 1800s, waves of German and Czech immigrants settled across central Texas. Many of them opened butcher shops and meat markets in growing farming communities. These shops sold fresh meat during the day. But they had a problem. Not every cut sold before closing time. Refrigeration was limited. Throwing meat away meant losing money. So butchers began experimenting with a practical solution. They seasoned tougher cuts like brisket with little more than salt and black pepper. Then they placed them in wood-fired pits where they could cook slowly for hour after hour. Not because they were trying to create a famous style of barbecue, but because slow cooking transformed meat that customers didn't want into something they did. It was a smart business decision, one that eventually became a culinary tradition. As the hours passed, something almost magical happened. The tough connective tissue slowly broke down. What had once been considered almost too tough to enjoy became unbelievably tender. The very thing that made brisket unpopular, its toughness, turned out to be its greatest strength, because no other cut changed so dramatically with time. In many ways, brisket became proof that patience could completely transform something ordinary into something extraordinary. And over generations, Texas pitmasters kept refining that process. Each generation learned from the one before it, not through fancy culinary schools, but through experience, through mistakes, through long nights beside a smoker. Which leads to an important realization. Aaron Franklin didn't invent brisket. He inherited more than a century of knowledge. The real story began long before Franklin Barbecue ever opened.
When people talk about Franklin barbecue today, it's easy to assume Aaron Franklin created modern Texas barbecue. But that's not really what happened. What Franklin did was something arguably even more impressive. He perfected a tradition that had already existed for generations. To understand that tradition, we have to go back to the small towns of central Texas in the late 19th century. Back then, barbecue wasn't a trendy weekend hobby. It wasn't something featured on television, and it certainly wasn't a tourist attraction. It was everyday food. Many local butcher shops served nearby farming communities. Customers would buy fresh meat to take home. But there was another service these butcher shops offered. They cooked meat for people. Large brick pits burned with local hardwoods like post oak. Instead of covering meat with thick, sweet sauces, pitmasters let smoke do most of the work. Seasoning stayed incredibly simple, usually just coarse salt, fresh cracked black pepper, sometimes nothing more. The goal wasn't to hide the flavor of the beef, it was to celebrate it. When the meat was ready, it wasn't served on fancy plates. It was wrapped in butcher paper, sliced by hand, eaten with bread, pickles, onions, and maybe a few simple sides. Even today, you'll still see many Texas barbecue restaurants following that same tradition. Because in Texas, barbecue has never been about complicated recipes. It's about respecting the meat, respecting the fire, and respecting the time it takes to do both properly. Franklin embraced that philosophy completely. He didn't reinvent brisket with secret marinades.
He didn't rely on exotic spices. He didn't drown the meat in barbecue sauce. Instead, he focused on mastering every small detail, buying high-quality beef, carefully trimming each brisket, managing clean wood smoke, maintaining steady heat, knowing exactly when the meat was ready, and just as importantly, when it wasn't. To many people, that sounds almost too simple. Salt, pepper, smoke, time. But anyone who has tried making great barbecue knows simplicity can be incredibly difficult. Because when there are only a few ingredients, there's nowhere to hide mistakes. If the fire isn't right, you'll taste it. If the brisket isn't rested long enough, you'll notice. If the meat is overcooked by even a little, everyone will know. That's why consistency has become Franklin's greatest achievement. Not making one incredible brisket, making extraordinary brisket again and again and again.
Year after year. That's what transformed Franklin Barbecue from a popular local restaurant into an American food icon. But after learning all this, one question still remains. If the wait is so long, if the prices aren't exactly cheap, if there are dozens of excellent barbecue restaurants across Texas, why do people keep choosing Franklin? What makes standing in line for hours feel completely worthwhile? The answer has less to do with barbecue and more to do with human nature. At the beginning of this story, we asked a simple question. Why would anyone willingly stand in line for hours just to eat lunch? By now, you probably know the answer isn't just because the brisket tastes good. There are plenty of places in Texas that serve excellent barbecue. Some have shorter lines. Some cost less. Some are hidden local favorites that tourists never discover. So why Franklin? The answer is that people aren't simply buying food. They're buying an experience that can't be mass-produced.
Think about what happens before someone even takes the first bite. They wake up early. They drive across Austin before sunrise. Or maybe they flew in from another state the night before. They bring coffee, camping chairs, a book. They spend hours talking with complete strangers. They watch the smoke rising from the pits. They smell oak wood drifting through the air long before they ever see the cutting board. Little by little, anticipation starts building. Psychologists have long known that anticipation can shape how we experience something. When we invest time and effort into reaching a goal, that goal often feels more meaningful once we finally get there. The wait itself becomes part of the memory. That's why people don't just remember eating Franklin barbecue. They remember the entire day, the conversations in line, the excitement when the doors finally opened, watching the pitmasters slice brisket just a few feet away, hearing someone in front of them quietly say, "This is my first time," or someone behind them smile and reply, "You're going to love it." For many visitors, Franklin isn't just lunch, it's a pilgrimage, a destination they've dreamed about for years. And when they finally reach the front of the line, they're not simply ordering meat, they're completing a journey. Ironically, if there were no line at all, some of that magic might disappear. Because scarcity changes the way we value things. When something is available anytime, anywhere, it often feels ordinary. But when something can only be experienced under very specific conditions, it becomes memorable. Franklin barbecue isn't famous because people wait. People wait because Franklin has refused to change the very things that made it famous. So, after everything we've learned, there's still one final question. Is Franklin barbecue actually worth waiting hours for? The honest answer is, that depends on what you're looking for. If your only goal is to eat great brisket, you can absolutely find incredible barbecue across Texas. Places like Snow's Barbecue, Goldie's, Louis Mueller, Interstellar Barbecue, and many others have earned outstanding reputations in their own right. Texas is filled with talented pitmasters. Franklin doesn't have a monopoly on great barbecue. But that's also missing the point. People don't travel to Franklin because it's the only place serving excellent brisket. They come because Franklin represents something larger. It represents patience in a culture obsessed with speed. It represents craftsmanship in an age of automation. It represents choosing quality over unlimited growth. In many ways, Franklin Barbecue has become a reminder that not everything meaningful can be scaled. Some things simply take time. And perhaps that's why the restaurant continues to inspire so much admiration. Aaron Franklin could have turned his name into hundreds of locations across America. He almost certainly would have made far more money. Instead, he chose something much harder: protecting a standard. Every single day, every single brisket, every single customer. That's a decision you can taste. Whether that taste is worth standing in line for 5 hours, only you can decide. If you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the history, culture, and hidden secrets behind the foods we eat every day. And until next time, thanks for watching.